I never thought betrayal could wear the face of someone I once called sister. For most of my life, I prided myself on being a good judge of character. I was the kind of woman who trusted slowly, but deeply. Maybe that's why when I met Marissa 20 years ago, something in me just knew, or thought I knew that she was someone I could keep forever. I was 29, then married for 5 years to Daniel, and juggling the chaos of raising our 2 young kids while building a home filled with laughter and warmth. Marissa came into my life like sunlight pouring into a dusty room, sudden, brilliant, impossible to ignore. We met at a local charity event, both volunteering to organize a fundraiser for the community center. She was everything I wasn't: spontaneous, witty, endlessly charming. I remember how everyone seemed drawn to her like moths to a flame. But unlike most people who glow too brightly and burn out fast, Marissa had this depth, or at least she made me believe she did. She laughed easily, listened carefully, and had this way of making you feel like your life, your stories mattered. At that time, Daniel was distant, not cruel, but somewhere else. His job as a contractor demanded long hours, and when he came home, his eyes were tired. We spoke, but rarely connected. I didn't think much of it. Marriages go through phases. I believed we were solid. Marissa noticed, though. She always noticed. She'd tilt her head sympathetically when Daniel ignored me at dinners, or when I'd mentioned that he'd canceled our weekend plans again. Men like him don't realize how lucky they are, she'd say, her voice low, almost tender. I used to think she was being kind. Now I wonder if she was laying the first stone of something far darker. The years went by and Marissa became part of our family's rhythm. She joined us for birthdays, holidays, even helped with the kids when Daniel had to travel. She'd show up with her hair tied back, apron on, and insist on cooking dinner so I could take a break. She knew exactly how Daniel liked his steak, how he took his coffee, small things I didn't even notice she was memorizing. I remember one night after the kids were asleep, the 3 of us sat in the living room drinking wine. The firelight flickered across Marissa's face as she laughed at one of Daniel's dry jokes. I felt a twinge, not of jealousy, but of something unfamiliar. A sense that I wasn't in the room the same way they were. That maybe I was watching something bloom that I couldn't name. I brushed it off. I loved them both in different ways, of course, and love, I told myself, wasn't something that divided. It multiplied. But I was wrong. The unraveling began quietly. Daniel started smiling more when his phone buzzed, retreating into corners to take work calls. He was softer, somehow warmer, but not toward me. I'd walk into a room, and he'd quickly set his phone down, guilt flashing across his face like lightning before he'd compose himself. I wanted to believe it was nothing, but the pit in my stomach grew heavier each day. One morning, I found Marissa's scarf in our guest room. It smelled faintly of her perfume, that expensive vanilla scent she always wore. When I asked her about it later, she laughed. "Oh, I must have forgotten it after the barbecue last weekend," she said. But we hadn't had a barbecue. Not in months. I began to notice more things, the way Daniel mentioned her name too easily. How her laughter seemed to echo in our house, even when she wasn't there. The kind of intimacy that didn't need touching to be dangerous. I told myself I was overthinking, paranoid even. After all, this was Marissa. My best friend. The woman who held my hand through my father's funeral, who stayed with me when I was hospitalized after my miscarriage. She had seen my soul in its most broken state. Surely she wouldn't, but betrayal doesn't arrive like thunder. It seeps quiet, consistent, until one day the ground beneath you gives way. It was a Thursday when everything finally broke. Daniel told me he had a late meeting. I didn't question it, not out loud at least. But as soon as he left, I found myself pacing the living room, the air thick with unease. I poured a glass of wine I didn't drink, sat on the couch, then stood up again. Something inside me whispered, "Go. Find out." I grabbed my keys, heart pounding, and drove toward his office. But halfway there, I took a wrong turn. Or maybe it wasn't wrong at all. It led me to the small motel near the edge of town, the one Daniel and I used to joke about when we were younger, saying it looked like something out of a bad movie. And there, under the dim glow of the parking lot lights, was his truck. I don't remember getting out of my car or walking to the room. I only remember the sound laughter muffled through the thin motel door. Her laughter. When I pushed the door open, time fractured. Marissa's back was to me, her hair falling over the sheets like dark silk. Daniel froze, eyes wide, mouth forming my name, but no sound coming out. The world tilted, colors fading until everything was a blur of betrayal and disbelief. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there feeling something inside me, something sacred, quietly die. She turned, then clutching the sheet to her chest, her face pale. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered. But it was exactly what it looked like. I left before either of them could say another word. I don't remember the drive home. I only remember sitting in my kitchen hours later, staring at the cold, untouched dinner I had made for Daniel. The clock ticked past midnight, and still I sat there frozen between fury and grief. The next morning he came home. His voice was calm, too calm. "It just happened," he said. "We didn't mean for it to." I wanted to laugh, or maybe scream. "You didn't mean to," I said, my voice shaking. "You accidentally slept with my best friend?" He didn't look at me. We were both lonely. Those words hit harder than any confession could. After that day, everything blurred. The kids were confused, asking where Marissa was, why their dad moved into the guest room. I told them as little as I could they didn't deserve to bear that kind of pain. Marissa tried calling. Dozens of times. I didn't answer. Then came the letters, long, tear-stained apologies about how she never intended to fall for him, how she lost control, how she still loved me. Each one ended with the same line. "Please forgive me." Forgiveness. It's such a strange word, isn't it? It sounds noble, healing even. But in that moment, it felt like poison. Months passed. Daniel eventually left the house for good. He said he was moving in with a friend. I didn't have to ask who. I saw the way his eyes softened when her name came up. I thought I'd break completely, but I didn't. Pain has a way of hollowing you out until there's nothing left but the bare truth of who you are. And in that hollow space, something new began to take shape, resolve. I rebuilt myself quietly. I focused on my kids, on my work, on the small joys that didn't depend on anyone else. I stopped wearing my wedding ring and started sleeping peacefully again. Every day hurt a little less. Every sunrise was proof that I could survive without either of them. But the universe has its own sense of justice, patient, quiet, and sometimes cruelly poetic. A year later, I ran into Marissa at the grocery store. She looked different, thinner, restless, her once perfect hair unkempt. She froze when she saw me. For a long moment, we just stared at each other across the aisle, two ghosts of what used to be friendship. Then she approached, her eyes glistening. "Please, can we talk?" she said softly. "Just once." I wanted to walk away, but something in her voice, or maybe in my own curiosity, stopped me. We went outside, standing by the cold wind and faded parking lines. "Daniel left," she said finally. "A few months ago." I stayed silent. "He said he needed space," she continued, her voice trembling. Then I found out he was seeing someone else, a younger woman. I almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but disbelief. Karma, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. She looked at me, then desperate. "I'm so sorry, Lila. You were right to hate me. I ruined everything." I didn't reply. Words felt useless. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. "You didn't ruin everything I said. You just freed me from people who never deserved me." And with that, I walked away. That night, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and violet. The air was still heavy with that bittersweet ache of closure. I realized then that revenge doesn't always come with fire or fury. Sometimes it's simply the peace that comes when you stop needing an apology. But this story doesn't end there, because just when I thought I had closed that chapter for good, something happened that made me question everything I thought I knew about the past, about Daniel, and about the reason Marissa came into my life in the first place. 2 months after that encounter at the grocery store, life had begun to settle again. I was 43, working part-time at a local bookstore, and spending most evenings helping my daughter with her college applications, while my son juggled his first job. The house felt different, quieter, freer, though still echoing faintly with memories that refused to fade completely. I thought I had seen the last of both Daniel and Marissa. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't done with me yet. It started with a phone call one evening. I almost didn't pick up. The number was unfamiliar, and I'd grown wary of surprises. But something compelled me to answer. "Mrs. Lila Carter?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Dr. Franklin's office. I'm calling about your husband." She paused. "About Daniel Carter." I froze. My husband. The word hit me like a relic from another lifetime. Ex-husband, I corrected automatically. "What about him?" The woman hesitated before saying, "He's been admitted to the hospital. There's been an accident. You're listed as his emergency contact." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind went blank, my hand trembling as I clutched the phone tighter. Part of me wanted to hang up, to let whatever fate had found him unfold without me. But another part, the part that once loved him so fiercely, couldn't. When I arrived at the hospital, I didn't know what to expect. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. Daniel lay in the bed, pale, and bandaged, a tangle of wires and monitors surrounding him. His eyes fluttered open when he heard my voice. "Lila," he whispered. I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, pity, and something deeper that I couldn't quite name. "What happened?" "Car accident," the nurse said quietly. "He's lucky to be alive." Lucky. I looked at him, the man who had once been my whole world, now fragile and broken before me. He had been drinking, apparently, alone. I stayed only a few minutes that night, enough to make sure he was stable. As I turned to leave, his voice caught me. "Please," he said weakly, "don't go yet." I stopped. His eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen in years: regret. "You don't owe me anything, Daniel," I said softly. "We made our choices." He shook his head, wincing at the pain. "You were the only person who ever really saw me." The words lingered heavy with irony. Over the next few weeks, I visited him occasionally, not out of love, but perhaps out of closure. He had no one else. Marissa hadn't come. When I asked about her, he looked away. "She's gone," he said quietly. "Gone." "She left about 6 months ago. Took what was left in the joint account and disappeared. I think she's in California." Something twisted inside me, not satisfaction, not even vengeance, just an emptiness that felt strangely like peace. But there was something else, something odd, that began to surface during those visits. The first time I noticed, it was when one of the nurses, a young man named Owen, accidentally called me Mrs. Carter in front of Daniel. I corrected him gently, saying, "Ex-Mrs. Carter." But Daniel smiled faintly and said, "No, she's still family." Family. The word stung. I should have stopped going. But closure is a tricky thing. It doesn't always come cleanly. Some nights, I'd find myself sitting by his bed, talking about the children, about mundane things, about how strange it was to see each other again after so much pain. He'd listen quietly, eyes glistening, and for a moment, it almost felt like we were two old souls who had outlived their storm. Then one day, as I was leaving the hospital, I ran into someone in the hallway, a woman in her mid-30s, blonde hair, tied back, holding a bouquet of flowers. She looked nervous, out of place. "Are you here for Daniel Carter?" I asked instinctively. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I'm his daughter." I blinked, thinking I misheard. "I'm sorry, his what?" She looked at me, eyes wide and trembling. "I'm his daughter. My name's Emily. He doesn't know I found him." I stared at her, the world spinning. "That's not possible," I said slowly. "He has 2 children, both ours." She swallowed hard. "I was born before he met you. My mother told me the truth before she passed away last year. She said Daniel Carter was my father. I came here to see him." My mind reeled. Daniel had another child. One he never mentioned, not once, in 20 years of marriage. I wanted to deny it, to believe it was some misunderstanding. But the look in her eyes, that same pale blue I used to love, said otherwise. That night, I confronted him. He looked away, silent. "It's true, isn't it?" I said. "You had a daughter before me." He nodded slowly. "It was a mistake." I was young, scared. I didn't even know she was mine until years later. Her mother reached out once, but I ignored it. I didn't want to lose you. I felt my chest tighten. "So you built a marriage with lies." His voice broke. "Lila, please, it was so long ago. But lies don't die with time. They fester." I left the hospital that night feeling colder than ever. I didn't cry. I just walked through the parking lot, the sound of the rain tapping against my coat, realizing that every foundation I thought I had in life, my marriage, my friendships, even my understanding of the past, had been built on sand. A week later, Daniel was discharged. I didn't hear from him. I assumed Emily would take over his care. But 2 months later, a letter arrived in his handwriting. It was brief, almost hauntingly so. "Lila, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. I've left something for you in the safety deposit box at West Bank Trust. You'll understand when you open it. I'm sorry for everything. I truly am. Daniel." He passed away 3 days after that letter was sent. Heart failure. I didn't know what I felt. Relief, sadness, anger. Maybe all of it at once. But the mention of that deposit box gnawed at me until I finally went to the bank. Inside was a single envelope and a USB drive. The envelope contained a note. "I didn't tell you everything about Marissa. She wasn't who you thought she was." My hands shook as I plugged the USB into my laptop. There were photos, old ones, of Marissa, long before I met her. But in one, she was standing beside a younger Daniel, their arms around each other, smiling like a couple. My stomach dropped. They hadn't met through me. They had known each other years before I ever came into the picture. I clicked through more files, receipts, letters, fragments of an email chain. One message stood out, dated from years ago, when Marissa had first moved back to our town. "Daniel, you said if I came back, things would be different. I'm still waiting. Don't keep me waiting too long. M." The betrayal was older, deeper, and far more deliberate than I'd ever imagined. I sat there trembling, realizing the cruel truth. The woman I thought was my best friend had known my husband long before me, and likely came into my life with purpose. Whether it was revenge, obsession, or just twisted fate, I didn't know. For days, I couldn't sleep. Every memory replayed itself like a film. I couldn't turn off her laughter, her warmth, her careful interest in my marriage, the way she'd studied Daniel, as if he were something she'd lost and was trying to reclaim. It was as if my entire life had been a stage, and I was the only one who didn't know the script. But grief can only paralyze you for so long. One night, I gathered everything, the letters, the photos, the USB, and drove to the lake near our old home. It was the place Daniel and I used to go when life felt heavy, long before everything fell apart. The water shimmered under the moonlight, still and cold. I stood at the edge, holding the envelope, feeling the weight of 2 decades of lies pressing against my chest. Then I let it all go. The papers fluttered into the lake, dissolving into the ripples until they were gone. It didn't erase the pain, but it ended its power. Because sometimes revenge isn't about destruction, it's about release. And yet, just when I thought I had finally found peace, something unexpected arrived in my mailbox, a letter postmarked from California with no return address. Inside was a single line written in Marissa's unmistakable handwriting. You think you know the truth, Lila, but you don't know mine. That letter stayed on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I dared to touch it again. Every time I passed by, my eyes caught on that single sentence, taunting, sharp, and impossible to ignore. I had spent years trying to bury what she'd done to cleanse her name from the corners of my heart. But there it was, again, Marissa. Alive, aware, and reaching out from a distance, I thought I'd escaped. The handwriting was hers, delicate and looping, the same way she used to sign birthday cards for my kids. But something about the pressure of the ink, the slant of the letters, felt off, like a tremor of guilt lived inside every stroke. I finally sat down, unfolded the paper again, and turned it over, hoping for more. There was nothing, just that line. You think you know the truth, Lila, but you don't know mine. I should have thrown it away. I should have burned it, buried it, anything, but let it whisper to me in the dark hours of the night. But curiosity has its own gravity, and guilt its own hunger. The next morning, I called every number I had for her. All disconnected. Then I searched online. I found fragments an address registered under her name in Santa Rosa, California, a few legal filings, an old photo in a real estate magazine where she was smiling beside a sold sign. She looked happy, wealthy even, but then again, she always did. I told myself I wouldn't go, that it was madness to reopen old wounds. But the truth was, I needed answers. Not for her. For me. So 2 weeks later, I boarded a flight to California. I didn't tell my children. I didn't even tell my sister. I just packed a small suitcase and left, telling myself it was time to finish what had started years ago. When I arrived at her address, a neat modern house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, my heart pounded so hard it drowned out every rational thought. I rang the bell. For a long moment, nothing. Then the door opened just slightly. Marissa stood there. She looked older, thinner, her once luminous face shadowed by exhaustion. But her eyes, those gray-green eyes that used to sparkle at every dinner table, still carried that same unreadable calm. Lila, she said softly, almost in disbelief. You came? I didn't answer right away. I studied her, searching for some trace of remorse, of recognition of the woman I once called family. You sent me that letter, I said finally. She nodded. I needed you to know. Know what? That you slept with my husband, that you destroyed 2 families. My voice trembled. I already know all of that. Her expression didn't change. No, that's not the truth I meant. She stepped back, opening the door wider. Please, come inside. Let me explain. I hesitated, but something in her voice, raw, broken, made me follow. Her house was spotless but empty in a way that only guilt could create. No photos, no warmth, just sterile perfection. We sat across from each other at a small wooden table, the air between us thick with years of silence. She took a deep breath. Before I say anything, she began, I need you to understand that I loved you, Lila. That was never fake. I laughed bitterly. You loved me. You loved me so much you took my husband. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. Yes, and that's why it's killing me to tell you the rest. I folded my arms jaw tight. Then tell me. She reached for a small envelope from a drawer and pushed it toward me. You might want to sit down for this. Inside were photographs, old, yellowed prints. The first one showed a young woman I didn't recognize holding a baby in her arms. On the back, written in faded ink, Daniel, 1976. I looked up sharply. What is this? That's my mother, Marissa said quietly. And that baby is Daniel? My stomach twisted. That's impossible. Daniel was born in North Carolina. He told me his mother, his adoptive mother, she interrupted. He never told you the truth. He was adopted at 2 years old. My mother gave him up after she was disowned for having a child out of wedlock. She spent years trying to find him. She never could, and when she died, I found her letters. I felt my blood run cold. You're saying... I'm saying Daniel was my brother. The room spun. I stared at her, my heart pounding so violently I could barely breathe. That can't be true, I whispered. I didn't know at first, she said, tears streaking her face. When I met you at the fundraiser, I had no idea who you were married to. But when I saw his photo on your mantle, I froze. I recognized him from one of my mother's letters. I didn't tell you because I needed to be sure. I asked around, found records, birth certificates. It was him, Lila. It was really him. I covered my mouth, shaking. So what happened next, you knew, and you still. She looked down, ashamed. I didn't plan for any of it. I confronted him privately. He didn't believe me at first. We did a DNA test. She took another envelope and slid it forward, lab results official, and dated. Positive, full siblings. My entire body went numb. She continued, her voice trembling. He was destroyed when he found out. Said it explained everything, why he felt so drawn to me, why he couldn't understand the connection he couldn't shake. He said it felt unnatural, but familiar. I wanted to vomit. Marissa, stop. She looked at me, desperate. He couldn't handle it. That's why he drank, why he left. That's why he told you nothing. Because he couldn't bear the shame. I pushed back from the table, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Do you have any idea what you've done? You let me think you were my friend. You let me hate myself for not being enough when all along. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was protecting you and myself. I thought if I stayed close, I could stop him from breaking completely. But it went too far. I made the wrong choices. I thought love could heal something that was never meant to be touched. I stood there, silent, trembling. Part of me wanted to scream, to tear the house apart, to erase every trace of her existence. But another part, the part that had spent years drowning in unanswered questions, felt a strange, aching relief. For the first time, the chaos made sense. The secrecy, the guilt, the distance. It was all built on a truth too horrifying for either of them to face. I never wanted him, she whispered. I just wanted to understand why fate tied our lives together in such a cruel way. And by the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late. He hated himself for it. He said he could never forgive either of us. I sank back into the chair, tears blurring my vision. So what now? What do you want from me? Nothing, she said softly. I just needed you to know the truth before I disappear for good. Disappear. I'm dying, Lila. Her voice broke. Pancreatic cancer. They caught it too late. I stared at her, unable to process it all. How long? Months, maybe less. Silence filled the room, heavy, suffocating, final. I stood up, numb. You've taken everything from me, I said quietly. My marriage, my peace, my past. And now You want my forgiveness. She met my eyes. No, I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to have the truth before I'm gone. You can hate me, but please don't live in the dark like I did. I left without another word. Outside, the California sun was blinding. I stood there on the curb, clutching the DNA papers, the letter, the proof of everything I never wanted to know. My mind screamed, but my body was still. I went back to my hotel and locked myself in. For hours, I sat by the window, staring at the sky, as if it held answers. And in a way, it did. Because I realized something then, truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just changes the shape of your cage. I flew home the next day carrying nothing but that envelope. I didn't tell my children what I'd learned. How could I? What good would it do to drag the dead into the light? But 1 week later, another letter arrived. Same handwriting. This one said, he wasn't the only one she gave away. And below it, a photograph, a baby girl wrapped in a blanket. No name, just a date. The same year I was born. I sat frozen in my chair for nearly an hour staring at that photograph. My reflection in the window was pale, trembling, a ghost of the woman I'd been even yesterday. The letter's last line echoed in my head. He wasn't the only one she gave away. I turned the photo over. On the back, written in that same careful hand, were 3 words: find the truth. I tried to steady my breathing. My hands shook as I reached for my old photo albums, flipping through years of birthdays, weddings, holidays. I thought maybe I'd find something, a face that didn't belong, a hint I'd missed. But there was nothing. When you've lived long enough, you start to believe your past is a fixed story. But suddenly, mine felt rewritten, like pages had been torn out and replaced by someone else's hand. I called the hospital in California. They confirmed Marissa had been admitted 2 days prior for palliative care. I almost hung up, but something inside me, that old restless ache for answers, told me to go. When I arrived, she looked smaller, frailer, but her eyes were still sharp. You got the letter, she whispered as I approached her bed. I nodded. What does it mean, Marissa? What are you trying to tell me now? Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. You were her other child, Lila. I stared at her, uncomprehending. My mother, she said slowly, didn't just give up Daniel. She gave up a second baby 2 years later, a girl. I found the adoption records after she died. I took a step back, my chest tightening. No, that can't be true. She reached weakly for a folder on the nightstand. It's all in there. I spent years trying to find her. But the adoption was sealed. Only the first name was written in the documents. I swallowed hard. What name? She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Lila. The air left my lungs. I didn't know until after I betrayed you, she whispered. By the time I found the paperwork, it was already too late. I wanted to tell you, but how could I? How could I look at you and say I was the woman who destroyed your marriage and your sister? I felt my knees give way, collapsing into the chair beside her bed. My hands gripped the edge of the mattress, desperate for something solid in a world that had just come undone. I thought I lost my family, I said, my voice shaking. And now you're telling me I've been living next to the only piece of it I had left. Marissa nodded weakly. We were both victims of her choices, Lila, of a woman who believed shame was more powerful than love. I buried my face in my hands, silent sobs racking my body. For years I had hated her for the lies, the betrayal, the cruelty. And now, staring at the woman who was both my enemy and my blood, I didn't know what to feel anymore. She reached out her trembling fingers, brushing my arm. Please don't hate me anymore, she whispered. Not now. I don't want to die knowing my sister despised me. I lifted my head, tears blurring my vision. Sister. The word felt foreign, heavy, and yet strangely familiar, like something my soul had always known but forgotten. She smiled faintly. You have her eyes, she murmured. Our mother's. That's how I knew. The first day we met, I couldn't stop staring. You looked just like the baby in the photograph. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I sat there as she drifted in and out of sleep, her breathing shallow, her voice fading. I stayed through the night, the silence of the hospital room thick with memories that weren't mine, but somehow belonged to me now. Just before dawn, she stirred again. Lila? I'm here, I whispered. Promise me something, she said, her voice barely audible. Don't live your life in anger. We were both born into brokenness. Don't let it define you like it did me. Her hand slipped from mine moments later. The monitor beside her went still. I didn't cry right away. I sat there for hours numb until the sun rose and painted the walls a pale gold. It was only then that I realized what forgiveness feels like, not a rush of relief, but a quiet surrender. I arranged her funeral myself. No one came except me and the hospital chaplain. I placed a single white rose on her coffin for the life we lost and the truth we finally found. When I returned home, I went straight to my attic. Boxes of old records files, papers, things Daniel had left behind years ago. Something told me I wasn't done yet. And I was right. In one of Daniel's folders, hidden between insurance documents, was a letter addressed to Elle. It was written in his handwriting, dated 2 months before he died. Lila, there are things I should have told you long ago, but I didn't know how. Marissa came into our lives for a reason I never told you, because I asked her to. When I found out she was my sister, I didn't know how to handle it. She wanted to meet you. She said you were the other baby. I didn't believe her, not then. But after the DNA test, I realized she might be right. I didn't know how to tell you that the woman you called your best friend could be your blood. And after what we did, I lost the right to say anything. I'm sorry for every lie. If I could change one thing, it would be that you never met either of us. But maybe you were meant to. Maybe this is how broken families find their way back, even through the worst kind of truth. I pressed the letter to my chest and finally let the tears fall. It was grotesque, poetic, tragic, and yet somehow it all connected. My husband, my best friend, my blood. A triangle of pain born from secrets buried before I was even born. For weeks after that, I walked through life in a haze. But one evening, as I watched my children laughing in the backyard, something shifted. I realized that the curse could end here, that maybe the whole purpose of uncovering the truth wasn't to hurt, but to heal. I told them the story, all of it, the betrayal, the family ties, the redemption. They listened stunned, then hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. My daughter whispered, "Mom, maybe you went through all that so we don't have to." And maybe she was right. A few months later, I visited the small cemetery in Santa Rosa. I brought 2 roses this time, one for Marissa, one for Daniel. I placed them side by side and stood in the quiet morning air, the world around me finally still. I forgive you, I said softly. Both of you. But more than that, I forgive myself for not knowing, for loving, for surviving. The wind carried my words away, and for the first time in years, I felt light. Because the truth, no matter how cruel, is still better than the prison of not knowing. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't about setting others free. It's about reclaiming your own peace. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea watching the stars appear one by one. The house was quiet, filled not with loneliness, but with memory and strange, unexpected grace. Sometimes the people who break us are the ones who lead us back to ourselves. And that's what this story really is not about: betrayal, or revenge, or even karma. It's about what remains after everything else has burned away. If my story touched your heart, share it so others can hear it too. Comment below. Do you believe that forgiveness can truly set a person free?